Hey listeners, this is Ben, the Amateur Exegete, and you're listening to episode 16 of Bible Study for Amateurs. Today's episode is An Amateur's Toolbox, the Old Testament by Michael Coogan. In the previous 5 episodes, I went over some study Bibles that belong in every amateur exegete's toolbox. Today, we turn our attention to some textbooks and similar resources that should go in there as well, beginning with Michael Coogan's The Old Testament, a historical and literary introduction to the Hebrew Scriptures. Though it is currently in its 4th edition, the version I'll be talking about today is the 3rd. Let's start with Michael Coogan. Who is he? Well, Coogan is currently a professor of religious studies at Stonehill College in Easton, Massachusetts, as well as director of publications at the Harvard Semitic Museum. He's also a prolific author, authoring and editing several volumes, including The Oxford History of the Biblical World, God and Sex, What the Bible Really Says, and, as we've already looked at, the New Oxford Annotated Bible. Coogan has a Ph.D. in Ancient Near Eastern Languages and Literature from Harvard University. He's no slouch. The Old Testament, published by Oxford University Press, is one of the best introductions to the Hebrew Bible that I've come across. At just under 600 pages, it covers the entirety of the Jewish scriptures, including background, historical context, and literary features. For example, in Chapter 2, Coogan covers the setting of the Hebrew Bible, the so-called Promised Land. There are sections on geography and topography, climate, agriculture, and more. For an undergraduate student who knows next to nothing about the setting of the Bible, this is, for lack of a better word, a godsend. And for an amateur, it is indispensable to appreciating the biblical texts. Like most surveys and introductions of the Hebrew Bible, Coogan begins with the beginning, the Torah, or Pentateuch. So, chapters 3 through 5 comprise part 2 of the work, Cosmic Origins. Taking a source-critical approach, Coogan sees a variety of sources in the book of Genesis and devotes all of chapter 4 to a discussion of how the Pentateuch came to be, per both the traditional view and modern scholarly consensus. In part 3, chapters 6 through 14, Coogan turns his attention to the origin of the nation of Israel, at least how the story is told in the books of Genesis through Judges. Coogan notes that, with regard to the Exodus, that, quote, no direct correlation exists between any person or event found in Exodus chapters 1 through 15 in non-biblical sources. This, in and of itself, should not force us to believe that there is nothing historical at all about the account. A few paragraphs later, Coogan writes, a convergence of evidence exists, and the most parsimonious reconstruction based on that evidence is that an Exodus, or according to some scholars more than one, did take place. That is more reasonable than the hypothesis that the Exodus never occurred. I'm inclined to agree. In chapters 15 through 22, Coogan looks at the stories found in the books of Samuel and Kings, sprinkling in the mix the writings of those prophets who were at work during the historical period these texts purportedly cover. So, for example, chapter 20 covers 2 Kings chapters 15 through 20, 2 Chronicles chapters 29 through 32, Isaiah chapters 1 through 39, and the book of the prophet Micah. And chapter 21 covers 2 Kings chapters 21 through 23, 2 Chronicles chapters 33 through 35, Zephaniah, Nahum, and the apocryphal prayer of Manasseh. In Part 5, chapters 23 through 24, Coogan looks at the exilic and post-exilic period, including the return as it is told in texts like Ezra, Nehemiah, Deutero-Isaiah, and more. In chapter 26, the first chapter of Part 6, he considers apocalyptic literature in a section that functions as an excellent introduction to the subject. Though scholars typically associate apocalyptic with texts like the Book of Daniel, Coogan notes that many of the features of apocalyptic literature are also found in earlier prophetic literature. So, there is some evidence for it in books like Amos and Hosea. And the reason for the rise of apocalyptic literature? Here's Coogan. The fall of Jerusalem in 586 BCE and the Babylonian exile were traumatic for those who experienced them, and many scholars have seen such moments of crisis as the setting for apocalyptic movements. For more on this, listen to episode 4 of this podcast entitled 2 Pivotal Moments. In Part 7, Coogan goes over the books of Jonah, Esther, Job, Ecclesiastes, and the always steamy Song of Solomon, as well as apocryphal texts like 1st and 2nd Maccabees, Baruch, Sirach, Tobit, and more. In addition to chronological charts and a glossary, one of the most helpful parts of Coogan's textbook are the bibliographies that appear at the end of each chapter. For readers who want to find more than what this introductory work offers, the bibliographies offer additional routes to take to learn more. And personally, I judge works by the quality of their bibliographies. Coogan's work doesn't disappoint. That's all the time we've got this week. See you next time. And remember, in the words of Richard Elliott Friedman, one does not need to deny what is troubling about the Bible in order to pay respect to what is heartening. Thanks for listening.